We were incredibly badly prepared to fight them. I mean, we didn't know really what to do.
It was all hand-to-hand fighting, boot, butt, and bayonet.
The Japanese, they were first-class soldiers, and very brave, and very brutal.
I must confess I absolutely loathe them. We all had a deep loathing for them.
Lord Mountbatten, he said, I believe you think you are the Forgotten Army. You're not the Forgotten Army. Nobody's ever heard of you.
On December the 7th, 1941, Japan launched a series of surprise attacks against the Americans and the British in the Pacific. They bombed the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, destroying or damaging 18 warships and 349 aircraft. On the same day, they struck at Britain's colonies in Hong Kong and Malaya. By attacking while Britain was fighting for its survival in Europe, Japan hoped to wipe out British influence in the Pacific. By February 1942, the Japanese had swept through the Malay Peninsula and had captured Singapore, together with 125,000 British and Allied troops. Japan was now advancing westwards, through Thailand towards Burma and its capital, Rangoon. Of all the British campaigns in World War II, Burma was the worst. Not because it was the longest, though it was, nearly 4 years, but because here in Burma there was so much more to fear and to endure. A fanatical enemy, the jungle, hunger, thirst, disease, dying of wounds hundreds of miles from anywhere, and being taken prisoner by the Japanese. Soldiers who fought in other places knew of these things and were grateful not to be here. And so it seems infinitely sad that for 50 years the men who did fight here, the 14th Army, thought of themselves as forgotten. Few of the men of the 14th Army have ever returned to Burma. But last May, 3 went back with us to visit some of the places they fought in as young soldiers half a century ago. John Hill of the 2nd Battalion of the Berkshire Regiment commanded a company of infantry. Richard Rhodes James was a Chindit, the long-range penetration force that fought behind Japanese lines. Bruce Kinloch, like the others in his early 20s, was in the 1st 3rd Gurkhas. He was the first of the 3 to encounter the Japanese, only 10 weeks after Pearl Harbor. To reach Rangoon, the Japanese had to cross a bridge spanning the river Sitang. The British 17th Division had prepared the bridge for demolition, but only 1 brigade of its 3 had reached the comparative safety of the west bank. Bruce Kinloch and his Gurkha riflemen were defending the eastern end of the bridge, trying to fight off the Japanese until the remaining 2/3 of the division could cross. The problem for the British commander was to choose the right moment to blow up the bridge.
At 5:30 in the morning, there were 3 enormous explosions. And after that, there was absolute silence. For at least, I think, 2 or 3 minutes. Complete silence. And then the Japs realized first and started chattering like a whole wagon load of monkeys. And then our hearts fell down into our boots. We realized that our route across the river had been cut.
So your own side had blown the bridge, leaving you on the wrong side of the river. Were you angry?
Bloody angry. And we were doing the job we thought we were meant to do, then some bugger goes and blows the bloody bridge before we could get over it.
Kinloch decided to swim the river and look for boats. So where did you swim across?
Roughly, you can see just over that boat there. It is about, it's a long swim, about 1,000 yards.
And what did you find when you got there?
Well, no troops. And all the boats we inspected had been smashed in by the sappers to prevent the Japs getting them. We launched one, it sank. So we went and found another one. Eventually we did find one which was usable. Of quite a big sampan and brought it across.
And who were the first people you took over the river? Presumably the wounded.
That's right. So the wounded had obviously been left behind because they're too far gone. And some of them were literally dying. But we felt we couldn't leave them in the hands of the Japs.
Thousands of British and Indian troops were taken prisoner. Of nearly 5,000 men cut off, fewer than 2,000 eventually got away. It was the decisive battle of the campaign, for the bridge was the last obstacle between the Japanese and Rangoon, only 70 miles away.
We were incredibly badly prepared to fight them because we had no barbed wire, we had no guns to support us. All our trenches were badly sighted. I mean, we didn't know really what to do.
I mean, all the time I was in the Burma Rifles, we never went in the jungle. We had absolutely tip-top jungle fighting troops, but we trained them for sort of mounting guard in St. James's Palace.
The army had very little air support. In Britain, after the retreat from Dunkirk, the RAF had beaten off the threat of a German invasion. In Burma, with only 37 fighters, the Air Force was outnumbered and outclassed by Japanese planes.
The Japanese had got Zeros as fighters, which far outflew anything that the British or the Americans could put together, especially out there. I think there was about 12 Hurricanes, ex-Battle of Britain, ex-Middle East, shunted out to Burma. There was number 5 squadron, Mohawks, and there was a squadron of Brewster Buffaloes. Now the Brewster Buffaloes, nobody would fly them, not even the Yanks who made them. The Yanks reckoned that when you got in a Brewster Buffalo and took off, you was a lucky man if you touched ground again. That was without any fighters or meeting anybody.
Rangoon still has the look of a faded imperial capital. Until 1937, Burma was governed as a province of India. At the outbreak of war, it was still a relatively quiet outpost of empire, one the British never expected to have to defend. The Japanese bombers had first attacked Rangoon in December. There was a major raid on Christmas Day. Indian traders and laborers made up half the population of the capital, and the Indians were the first to flee, abandoning their shops and businesses and work on Rangoon's defenses.
The Indian population, which had been quite considerable, was fleeing out en masse, men, women and children, and there was simply no, or virtually no, support for them at all. The further we got out, it was quite appalling to see children particularly begging for water, and you simply couldn't give it because you hadn't got enough yourself. Added to this, there was a large cholera epidemic amongst them because they'd been drinking any water they could get, most of which was polluted. And this added an extra horror onto it. I mean, at one stage, I remember just down the road, there were piles of Indian corpses being flung on flames and burnt with paraffin.
We walked out of this small Burmese town on the main road going to Rangoon, and we looked at it, it's dead straight on a kind of bund. As far as the eye could see, there was one.
Japan had been waging war on 2 Burmese fronts, against the British and Indians in the northwest and the Chinese under American command in the northeast. To supply the Chinese divisions, the Americans wanted to drive a road from India across Burma to China. And to clear the way for the road, Chinese forces were pushing southwards. To support the Chinese, a large force of British, West African and Gurkha Chindits would be flown in gliders to central Burma to cut the Japanese supply lines. Their main target was the single-track railway running north-south through Burma. As bases, the Chindits would build their own temporary strongholds. Their code names were White City and Blackpool. Richard Rhodes James fought with his second Chindit expedition. 50 years on, he went back with us to the site of Blackpool. travelling along the railway line his expedition had tried to block. The Chindits had to build their own stronghold, starting with an airstrip. Without one, they'd have none of the guns, the heavy weapons they'd need to build a fortress. The first 4 gliders to come in all crashed. The Chindits extended the airstrip. Some Dakotas did get in. They did get some guns, anti-aircraft and 25-pounders. But all this time, the Chindits were being attacked by the Japanese, shelled during the day, frontal attacks at night. They lost many men, and the whole thing was a recipe for disaster. Today, the stronghold the Chindits called Blackpool is lost in these densely wooded foothills. By sighting it on rising ground, the Chindit commander could protect